Our last speaker before lunch is Nikki Dictson. We all know her very well, and they've been working on maybe not so much a report card like Bill talked about, but evaluating the progress that they've been making on Plum Creek and reporting that back to stakeholders. So we thought we would provide a short case study on some efforts within Texas to do something on reporting progress, which is important to all of us. So with that, Nikki, I don't know if you want to speak into that.
Okay. All right, does that work? Can you hear me? Okay, so just briefly, just the kind of a quick history of Plum Creek. The partnership started meeting with public meetings in April of 2006 for the Plum Creek Watershed. They met monthly to develop the Watershed Protection Plan over approximately 2 years, and the Watershed Protection Plan was completed and accepted by the partnership in February of 2008 and sent on to EPA. Which it was later accepted by EPA as a 9-element plan in the summer of 2009. But even before that February 2008 deadline, we were able to start a little bit of implementation before the plan was completed. So we've been working on, since that process of completing the plan, giving progress updates of what we're doing. And that generally entails update presentations at our quarterly meetings, update information in our newsletters and emails, of course, talking about adaptive management, where things that new programs have started and incorporating those, or new ideas, new educational projects, or talking about other programs that may have lost their funding, and how will we deal with that if we wrote that into the plan in the future times. The Watershed Protection Plan update on implementation, we've decided to incorporate it into a report that's going to be developed and distributed every 2 years. And so we are working on our first version of that 2-year report right now. And within that, trying to describe the progress of best management practices, of course the grants that we've received or are applying for, any additional trainings or outreach activities, as well as water quality data. So here's just a brief slide that shows some of the grants that we have received in the project, and the one at the top is our latest implementation coordination grant. I titled that myself just for, that'll be the grant that will be continuing tracking this project for the next 3 years that just started in November. We've had our water quality monitoring grants, urban stormwater control grants through TCEQ with 2 of our 4 main cities, our outreach and education grant that we received in the beginning, and then our other big implementation grant that was doing facilitation of the project, feral hogs, and our agricultural water quality management plan projects were under those grants. And so those are some of the grants that we received and we've been trying to track. It became pretty evident to me in that we developed our plan, we wrote our plan on a 10-year schedule, and so we finished that and we started the clock February 2008 when the plan was completed, and so it goes to 2018 over that 10-year period. So this is just, I put this together just to show kind of a timeline of when and where those other grants or projects started and stopped, because that became pretty important in looking at how we've progressed over the process. In our Watershed Protection Plan, when we developed that, we put in these nice tables where we broke down in each different section. This one's urban stormwater management measures. And when we discussed this with the partnership and put the plan together, we decided we wanted to break our 10-year period into kind of our near-term, mid-term, and long-term goals or projects that could be done over that period. And so we have now added this new column in here that we're including in this progress report that talks about the status up through November 30th of 2011 of how are we doing on that time frame. Are we meeting some of those goals or not? In many of the areas, we've exceeded our goals for years 1 through 3. You can see we have more pet waste stations than we had estimated, so that'll carry over and reduce some of the ones that we need in these later years that we have here. We have some of the projects that are in progress. And then it also became evident that we wanted to also report in here. Oh, it's not in this one. I thought the example was in this one. How long these are funded. So if you think back to that timeline of how long those projects are going to be funded and can carry on. Because most of the grants are 2 or 3 year grants, and we needed it to go for 10 years. So several of these are ongoing, and we have commitments from the city that they've got their street sweeper, and they will continue street sweeping into the future. Some of these other things that we put in here, wastewater treatment plant upgrades, of course, very costly projects. We push those into our mid or long-term range goals. With the current economics, we'll see how well we do with getting some of those done in this time frame. But we also are in that corridor that Todd talked about earlier with the increasing growth, and so some of those wastewater treatment plants will be upgrading just due to capacity concerns. So hopefully we can incorporate more of these things in those in the future. So we have length of pipe. Our cities have been doing really good, either using city funding or getting funding from Water Development Board, like SRF funding, to put in some of these projects. We are working on numbers here. The Caldwell County and Hayes County has been doing some septic system repair and replacement in their enforcement activities, and so we're working on being able to fill in some numbers to get us up to date on those processes to see where we are. In addition to looking at all of the non-point source issues that are going on in the watershed, we have many wastewater treatment plants, and EPA wanted us to look at when the new rule came into effect for adding the monitoring of E. coli and effluents, adding in that limit. Our basin, many of our wastewater treatment plants came due for their new permits here in 2010, and so based on where they were in that permit process is whether they had that E. coli effluent monitoring limit included in their permit or not. So we developed a table to track that. You'll see over time some of things happen to some of the permits. We have one permit here that now this permit has expired, and so later on we'll be able to take that one off. We also have a new permit that is in process being developed, so we'll have to add a new permit and plan into our table and keep tracking that. And monitoring and watching and being aware of when those permits are going to come up again, so we can make sure that some of these things that we're hoping or we wrote in the plan are included in those permit levels. Next on our table we had agricultural and non-domestic animals, or our feral hogs, management measures. This is the one I was thinking was going to come up earlier, where we put in there having a position that could be working on that program, and we have them funded through 2012. We have our feral hog education position funded through 2012. Both of those programs have put in on funding to continue after that. So we hope to update that we'll get another couple years of those programs. But you can see we had in years 1 through 3, we estimated how many water quality management plans we thought we would have completed for livestock and for cropland. And then you can see where our status is. And so some of that goes back to that timeline of when did you get the proposal, and then when do you get the person hired, and then you need to count in some training time for that person, person, and so it may look like they've had 2.5 years, but really they've only had maybe a year and a half to try and get on the ground and get cooperators working with them. So we've discussed with our partnership and some of our adaptive management how we'll need to be moving over some of the numbers that are over here in years 1 through 3, pushing them over to 4 through 6 and 7 through 10 to make sure that we are able to meet our goals at the end. In addition to looking at kind of the goals of how many water quality management plans, within our watershed protection plan, we looked at the watershed. We broke it into 35 sub-watersheds and our 3 main regions. And those regions are based on where those water quality monitoring stations were located that listed Plum Creek in the beginning. And those are really our metric that we're tracking against of the water quality levels at those 3 stations. So these 2 tables have been collapsed to those totals for the regions here. So our Ulen, our most northern station, Lockhart, our middle, and Luling down in the southern part of the watershed. So you can see our total of how many conservation plans and then where we're at in that process. So we're trying to take these back to those 35 sub-watersheds anywhere that we can. So I have information in those past 2 tables that look like this. I left this one in here. You probably can't read all of it, but I just wanted to show how we're trying to track at the sub-watershed level as well as at those regional levels and how well we're doing towards those goals. Because for each of these non-point sources, the feral hogs, the septic systems, we had put in at the sub-watershed level how many we wanted to try and get accomplished. So this is kind of an interesting table because we were able to get some funding for aerial control, and so we were able to remove 372 hogs through those flyovers of aerial control. And then this is just the numbers from our online reporting system where landowners have gone in and put how many hogs they have removed on their own property. And so we had a goal of a little over 1,800 hogs, and you can see between the aerial control and landowners controlling on their properties, we're a third of the way towards that goal. So doing well in that area. So we had our kind of management measures that you can put on the ground, tables, and then we also had tables that covered our outreach activities that we wanted to do. And we broke those up in a couple different ways as well. And we had broad-based programs. So those are programs that covered multiple areas, like our watershed stewards workshops. And so we had put in our plan how many we wanted to have of those. Guadalupe Blanco River Authority has spearheaded our elementary school water quality project, where they reach over 1,000 kids in 4th and 5th grades. And this program is funded through 2012, and hopefully will continue funding through GBRA. Another place where we've had some adaptive management that we're working on is the partnership was really interested in putting in entering Plum Creek watershed signs on the roadways, and they were looking at 30 locations, 60 signs to put up, and I think all but 3 of those are TxDOT managed roadways in our watershed. And so we've tried 3 times. We tried 3 times to go through TxDOT and get the ability to get permits to put up those signs, and we were told no all 3 times. So we've given up that we've been denied by TxDOT to be able to do that outreach activity. And then we also had originally put in the plan things like billboards, and the steering committee kind of changed their mind once we looked at what the cost is of those billboards, and they didn't like, you know, benefiting putting any more large signs, and so they changed their mind about moving forward with things like billboards. And so we're trying to track that and keep that incorporated within the program. So we have petway stations. Another place where we're deficient is having fats, oils, and grease workshops. Those didn't work out and get accomplished before that grant program ran out, but we are still working on trying to get something of that done. Moving on, more education stuff. You can see kind of our status here. We're doing pretty well and tracking on all of these, or going above and beyond, like the illegal dumping. So having these tables has made it easy to be able to track kind of how we were doing based on those early, mid, long-term goals, how we're doing. But we're also looking at water quality assessments, and we're presenting updated water quality data at the steering committee meetings and on the websites where people can get to. So this is just an example. This is our Lockhart site that's here in the middle of the watershed, and we have put together graphs that are rolling geomeans, rolling through time of over 5-year periods. So we can see how we're doing based on, here's the water quality standard on the red line, here's the nutrient criteria here on these red lines, and we can see how the water quality levels are doing at those 3 stations. Several other developments have came up along the way since we have developed the Watershed Protection Plan. The City of Kyle received funding from Texas Parks and Wildlife and are developing a Plum Creek Preserve, at 350 acres of parkland that's right along the Plum Creek watershed that will work to protect some riparian corridors and some of that upper urbanized area. State Highway 130 over this period developed the 130 wetland mitigation site right there just north of Lockhart, a 265-acre wetland, as mitigation for that state highway's impacts in the area, and that should be turned over to the county and the city as a park, and we're hoping to do some outreach and education there here in the next 2 to 3 years. The Central Texas Greenprint for Growth program came in and worked in both Caldwell and Hayes counties, and so many of our steering committee and the partnership were involved in that process. GBRA staff, while doing water quality sampling, detected a major oil spill and helped turn that in and get that repaired and cleaned up. And I didn't add on here, but we also had a major wastewater treatment plant spill in the city of Kyle of over 1 million gallons of water, and so did some extra studying and water quality sampling to try and see what the effects of that spill were. So some of the next steps for this Watershed Protection Plan update, this document's finishing being updated and having any of this additional information added. In January, the plan is to send the update out to the stakeholders for a 21-day comment period, and then we're going to discuss any of these comments that the partnership or steering committee stakeholders have at our quarterly February 9th meeting, so that they can work towards approving everything that's in the Watershed Protection Plan, making sure we're not leaving out anything. And then we plan to publish, print, and distribute this update beginning in March. So this document, this kind of progress report is going to function in several ways. As a progress report on the efforts and implementation, it's going to have all those tables that I showed you, kind of tracking what we have, but it has a lot of text and a lot of pictures to show what we've been doing as well. Between February 2008 and November 2011. And that part of it takes up about half, 50% of that document is just documenting those implementation efforts. The next 30%, about 30% of the document roughly, is discussing updates to the goals and strategies in the Watershed Protection Plan and any supporting documentation, some of those adaptive management examples that we had. And then probably the last 20% of that document is talking about the analysis of water quality data and how that's based towards the measures of success. This concept of this progress report was originally not detailed in the Watershed Protection Plan. We didn't really say in there how we said we were going to track how things were going, but we didn't say exactly how that was going to be accomplished. But when we developed our 319 grant with the Texas State Soil and Water Conservation Board, we established this intent for this report to be every 2-year report. And so we would have had one in 2010. We delayed that one, so this will be our first one that's going to come out here in 2012. Our intended audience for this report, it will be on the website, and we'll have print copies is for our stakeholders, our landowners, citizens, and any of the local governmental entities that are affected and involved in the implementation, as well as state and federal agencies with water quality restoration responsibilities. So that's all I